The dragons had ruled the galaxy for 3 million years. They were massive creatures, each one as large as a small building, with scales that could stop any weapon and flames that burned hot enough to melt steel. They lived for thousands of years, and in all that time, they had never met another species that could stand against them. The Draconic Imperium stretched across 10,000 star systems. Wherever the dragons went, other species bowed or died. It was simple. The dragons believed they were the peak of evolution, the ultimate form of life. They were strong, intelligent, and immortal. Everything else in the galaxy existed to serve them or to be destroyed. When the dragons found Earth, they expected the usual routine. Their scouts reported a young species called humans. These creatures had no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. They were small and weak, living on a single planet in an unremarkable star system. The dragons saw them as they saw all other species, prey waiting to be claimed. The ancient dragon Calthrokar volunteered to deliver the Imperium's message. He was old, even by dragon standards, with brass-colored scales and eyes that had watched civilizations rise and fall. He had personally conquered 16 species in his lifetime. To him, humans would be conquest number 17. Calthrokar arrived in Earth's orbit with ceremony and spectacle. His world ship was a massive structure, part vessel and part mobile fortress, covered in the bones of creatures from 100 dead worlds. He broadcast his message in the psychic language all dragons shared, a language that forced itself into the minds of any intelligent being who heard it. The humans received the message through their technology, translating the psychic impulses into words. The message was simple: kneel before the Draconic Imperium and serve, or be destroyed. Every species in the galaxy had heard these words. Most chose to serve. A few chose to fight and were erased from existence. The human diplomats asked for time to discuss the matter with their governments. Calthrokar laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. No species had ever asked for time before. They either submitted immediately or attacked in foolish defiance. But he was amused by their request, so he gave them one rotation of their planet to decide. During that single day, humanity moved with purpose. Every government, every military, every scientist and engineer worked together with a coordination the dragons had never witnessed. The humans had been watching the stars for decades, preparing for the possibility of hostile contact. They had contingency plans, weapons in development, strategies mapped out for scenarios just like this. When the day ended, the humans sent their answer. It was polite, carefully worded, and absolutely clear. No, humanity would not kneel. They would not serve. If the dragons wanted Earth, they would have to take it. Calthrokar could not believe what he heard. In 3,000 years of life, no species had ever refused the Imperium's mercy. He felt insulted, then angry, then eager. It had been centuries since he had enjoyed a real hunt. These humans would learn their place, and it would be entertaining to teach them. The dragon gathered his fleet. 300 dragons answered his call, along with thousands of ships crewed by vassal species who served the Imperium. It was far more force than necessary to conquer a single planet, but Calthrokar wanted to make a statement. The galaxy would watch humanity burn, and the lesson would be clear. The fleet entered Earth's star system with confidence. The dragons flew through space without ships, their bodies protected by psychic shields and their own armored scales. They were already kindling their flames, preparing to rain fire down on the human cities. Behind them, the vassal ships moved in formation, ready to land occupation forces once the dragons broke human resistance. As the fleet crossed the orbit of Mars, the humans attacked. But they did not attack the way the dragons expected. There were no brave warriors charging forward, no desperate last stands, no emotional declarations of defiance. Instead, the humans fought with cold, Calculated precision. Weapons the dragons had never seen before activated across the solar system. Humanity had spent decades developing technology for one purpose: killing things much stronger than themselves. They launched kinetic weapons accelerated to relativistic speeds, chunks of metal moving so fast they hit with the force of nuclear bombs. They deployed antimatter mines that detonated in precisely calculated patterns. They released swarms of missiles, millions of them, each one guided by artificial intelligence that analyzed dragon movement patterns and adjusted tactics in real time. Kalthrokar saw the first weapon too late. A tungsten rod, accelerated to 90% of light speed, struck him directly. The impact vaporized his ancient body instantly, turning 3,000 years of life into superheated plasma. Around him, other dragons died just as quickly, their individual power meaningless against weapons that treated physics itself as an arsenal. The dragons tried to adapt, tried to fight back with their flames and their psychic attacks. But the humans had studied them through their scouts, had learned how dragons thought and fought. Every dragon tactic was countered before it could be effective. The vassal ships fared even worse, their conventional weapons useless against human defenses designed specifically to stop them. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, 200 dragons were dead. The survivors fled back into deep space, their confidence shattered. The Imperium had lost more dragons in a single day than in the previous 1,000 years of conquest combined. Across the galaxy, other species watched the battle recordings in stunned silence. The dragons, the unstoppable dragons, had been beaten. Humanity had done what no other species had managed. They had made the dragons bleed. On Earth, the humans did not celebrate. They knew this was only the beginning. The dragons would come back, and next time they would bring more force. So humanity kept working, kept building, kept preparing. They had sent a message of their own to the Imperium. Humans were not prey. And if the dragons wanted a war, humanity would teach them what that truly meant. The Dragon Emperor Thalkorith the Eternal refused to accept the reports from the Mars battle. He was 300 years old, with scales made of living diamond that reflected light in every color. His flames could burn in the vacuum of space, hot enough to melt asteroids. He had personally conquered 40 species, and he had never known defeat. The Emperor called his council of elder dragons together. They gathered in the throne chamber of the Imperial world ship, a structure so massive it had its own gravity. The ancient dragons debated what had happened at Earth. Some suggested the humans had simply been lucky. Others claimed the first fleet had been too small, too unprepared. None of them suggested that humans might actually be dangerous. Thalkorith made his decision. He would send a proper war fleet to Earth, one that would erase this insult from history. He called for 15,000 dragons to gather, supported by millions of thralls and client species. It was the largest fleet the Imperium had assembled in 10,000 years. The Emperor wanted the galaxy to see what happened to species that defied the dragons. The war fleet took 6 months to gather and travel to human space. During that time, humanity worked without rest. They built new weapons, developed new strategies, and prepared their colonies for the coming storm. The humans knew they had surprised the dragons once, but surprise would not work a second time. Human scientists studied every piece of data from the first battle. They analyzed how dragons moved, how they thought, how they fought. The researchers discovered something important. Dragons relied on individual power and intimidation. Their tactics were millions of years old, unchanged, because nothing had ever forced them to adapt. Each dragon fought alone, trusting in their personal strength. Humans fought differently. They worked as teams, as units, as a unified species. Where a dragon saw itself as a warrior, humans saw themselves as soldiers in an army. Where dragons trusted their individual power, Humans trusted their coordination and technology. The human military also discovered something else. Dragons had predictable behaviors. They were biological creatures, despite their power, and biology could be exploited. Dragons' psychic senses worked on specific frequencies. Their scales, while incredibly strong, conducted heat in measurable ways. Even their pride was a weakness, making them underestimate threats and overcommit to attacks. When the Dragon War fleet arrived at the human colony of New Hope, they found the planet seemingly undefended. The orbital stations were quiet, the defense satellites inactive. The humans appeared to have abandoned the world, leaving their cities empty. The dragons saw this as confirmation of human cowardice. They dove toward the planet in a massive wave, eager to claim an easy victory. The Emperor himself led the charge, his diamond scales gleaming as he descended through the atmosphere. Then the trap closed. Humanity had not abandoned New Hope. They had turned it into a weapon. The planet's gravity generators activated, creating fluctuating wells that disrupted dragon flight patterns. Hidden beneath the surface, directed energy weapons emerged, firing at wavelengths the dragon's psychic senses could not detect. The abandoned cities released clouds of nanomachines, microscopic weapons that could slip between even the tightest scales. The dragons found themselves caught in a kill zone designed specifically to counter their strengths. When they tried to escape into space, human ships appeared, their weapons synchronized by artificial intelligence that coordinated attacks across the entire battlefield. The dragons fought back with their flames and psychic attacks, but every move they made had been predicted, countered, and turned against them. The battle for New Hope lasted 3 days. Human casualties were terrible. Dragon fire consumed entire cities, killing millions of civilians who had volunteered to stay behind as part of the defense plan. But dragon casualties were worse. Thousands of dragons died, their bodies falling from the sky or drifting in orbit. The survivors retreated, and Emperor Thalkarath felt fear for the first time in his long life. The war continued for 3 more years. Every battle followed the same pattern. Dragons would attack with overwhelming force, confident in their power. Humans would respond with new weapons, new tactics, new innovations. The dragons fought the same way they had always fought, because pride would not let them adapt. Humans fought differently in every engagement, learning and evolving with each encounter. Humanity began to escalate in ways that terrified even their own leaders. They built weapons that weaponized black holes. They created artificial intelligence war minds that thought in dimensions beyond human understanding. They modified their own soldiers, creating humans who could survive in vacuum, who could process information faster than baseline humans, who could fight in conditions that would kill normal people. The humans even cracked open their own star, using its energy to forge weapons that violated several laws of physics. When the dragons burned human cities, humanity responded by developing biological weapons designed to target dragon genetics specifically. When the dragons used their psychic attacks to drive humans insane, humanity built psychic shields and then psychic weapons of their own. By the end of the 2nd year, the dragons were no longer advancing into human space. By the end of the 3rd year, they were retreating, abandoning colonies they had held for millennia. The Imperium's client species began to whisper among themselves, wondering if the dragons were still the masters of the galaxy. Emperor Thalkarath watched his empire crumble and finally understood the truth. Humans were not clever prey. They were not lucky primitives. They were a different kind of predator entirely, one that had evolved on a planet so dangerous that cooperation was the only path to survival. Humans had carried that lesson into space, and they had turned it into a weapon more powerful than any dragon flame. The Emperor retreated to the fortress worlds at the heart of the Imperium, bringing his surviving dragons with him. He believed that humans would be satisfied with their territory, that they would accept the borders and live in peace. He ordered his fleets to hold defensive positions and sent messages offering a ceasefire. The human response arrived within a week. It was not what the Emperor expected. The message was simple and cold. The war would continue until the Draconic Imperium surrendered completely. There would be no peace, no negotiation, no compromise. Humanity had seen what the dragons were, and they had made a decision. The message included data files, thousands of them. They contained records from the Imperium's own archives, records humanity had captured during the war. The files showed the truth of dragon rule. 10,000 extinct species, worlds burned to nothing, civilizations erased because they had resources the dragons wanted, or simply because they had been in the way. The dragons kept trophies, the last remaining artifacts of dead cultures displayed in their throne chambers like hunting prizes. Admiral Chun Zhao, the commander of human forces, sent a personal message to the Emperor. Her face on the view screen was tired, aged by years of war, but her voice was steady and absolutely certain. She told him that humanity now understood what the Draconic Imperium truly was. The dragons were not rulers or conquerors. They were a plague that had infected the galaxy for millions of years, and humanity would be the cure. The Emperor watched the message and knew the truth. The war was not going to end with a peace treaty. It was going to end with the destruction of everything the dragons had built. Humanity was coming, and they would not stop until the job was finished. The human fleets began their advance into the heart of the Draconic Imperium 6 months after Admiral Chun's message. They did not come as liberators or as conquerors. They came as executioners, and the galaxy watched in a mixture of horror and hope. The Imperium's client species faced a choice. The dragons had ruled them for thousands of years through fear and violence. Now humanity offered them something the dragons never had: freedom. Human diplomats met with representatives from dozens of species, showing them evidence of dragon atrocities and offering them a place in a new galactic order based on equality rather than domination. Some species chose to stay, loyal to the dragons, either from genuine belief or simple fear. Others betrayed their masters immediately, seeing an opportunity for revenge after generations of oppression. Still others tried to stay neutral, hoping to survive regardless of who won the war. Humanity treated each species according to their choice. Those who helped the dragons were fought. Those who stayed neutral were left alone. Those who aided humanity were given weapons, training, and the promise of independence once the war ended. The dragons had ruled through fear. Humans ruled through something more powerful: hope. The war changed as it moved deeper into Imperium space. The dragons had retreated to their fortress worlds, massive planets that had been turned into defensive strongholds over millions of years. Each world was protected by weapons arrays, shield generators, and thousands of dragons willing to die defending their territory. The humans adapted their strategy. Instead of direct assaults, they began to wage a different kind of war. Human intelligence operatives infiltrated client species, spreading information and encouraging rebellion. Human scientists developed biological weapons specifically designed to target dragon genetics, diseases that would kill dragons while leaving other species unharmed. Human psychologists studied dragon culture and found the cracks in their society. The dragons discovered that their psychic communication network, which had always been their greatest strength, had become a vulnerability. Humans developed mimetic weapons, ideas that spread through the psychic network like viruses. Dragons began to doubt their emperor, question their right to rule, wonder if they were truly the galaxy's chosen species. Some dragons, especially younger ones who had never known anything but war against humanity, began to despair. The siege of Kralmoth Prime showed how completely the war had changed. Kralmoth was a fortress world, home to 5,000 dragons and protected by defense systems built over 1,000,000 years. The humans arrived with a fleet of only 300 ships, far too few for a direct assault. The dragons waited for the attack, confident they could destroy such a small force. The attack never came. Instead, human ships stayed in orbit and began broadcasting. They transmitted recordings of dragon war crimes, images of extinct species, testimonies from survivors of dragon attacks. They broadcast continuously for 3 months. Their messages aimed not at the dragons, but at the client species who served them. The client species on Kralmuth began to rebel, first in small ways, then larger. They sabotaged weapon systems, refused orders, and eventually attacked the dragons directly. The fortress world tore itself apart from within. By the time human forces landed, most of the dragons were already dead, killed by the very servants who had once feared them. This pattern repeated across the Imperium. World after world fell, not through human military might alone, but through a combination of warfare, diplomacy, and psychological operations. The dragons found themselves fighting enemies on all sides, humans from outside, rebels from within, and their own doubts from their psychic network. Emperor Thalkarath watched his empire collapse with growing desperation. He sent messages to the human leaders, offering concessions, territory, wealth, anything to make them stop. The humans ignored every offer. They had seen what the Imperium was, and they had decided it needed to end completely. The Emperor tried one final strategy. He gathered the remaining elder dragons, the most powerful individuals in the Imperium, and proposed a desperate plan. They would attack Earth directly, striking at the human homeworld with everything they had left. If they could kill enough humans, destroy enough cities, perhaps humanity would accept peace rather than continue the bloodshed. 10,000 dragons made the journey to Earth, flying through space with their psychic shields at maximum strength. They avoided human patrols, used secret routes through unexplored space, and approached Earth's solar system from an unexpected direction. It was the largest concentration of dragon power in one place since the war began. They emerged near Earth, ready to unleash devastation. But humanity had been waiting. The human military had predicted this exact strategy, knowing that desperate dragons would eventually target the human homeworld. Earth's defenses had been prepared for years, built specifically to counter a mass dragon assault. The battle lasted 12 hours. Every human weapon, every innovation, every lesson learned in 4 years of war was used. The space around Earth filled with weapons fire, psychic attacks, and the bodies of dying dragons. Human casualties were enormous. 3 orbital stations were destroyed, taking millions of lives with them. But the dragons lost more by the end of the battle. 7,000 dragons were dead. The survivors fled, broken and defeated. Emperor Thalkarath himself was badly wounded. His diamond scales cracked and burned. As he retreated toward the Imperium's core worlds, he finally accepted the truth. The dragons had lost. Humanity had proven stronger not because of individual power, but because they fought as one unified force with purpose and determination. The Emperor returned to Drakethir Prime, the dragon homeworld, and gathered the survivors. Fewer than 3,000 dragons remained out of the millions that had once ruled the galaxy. The fortress worlds were gone. The client species had rebelled or been freed, and human fleets were advancing on the homeworld itself. In his throne chamber, surrounded by the few loyal dragons who remained, Thalkarath faced the reality he had denied for so long. The Draconic Imperium was finished. The only question now was whether the dragons themselves would survive. Human ships appeared in orbit around Drakethir Prime, blockading the planet. The dragons on the surface prepared for the final battle, ready to die defending their birthworld. They expected the humans to attack immediately, to finish what they had started with overwhelming force. Instead, Admiral Chen Zhao sent a message. She requested a meeting with the Emperor, face to face, to discuss terms. Not terms of battle, but terms of surrender. The dragons were shocked. After everything that had happened, after all the death and destruction, humanity was offering them a chance to surrender rather than simply destroying them. Emperor Thalkorath did not understand. The dragons had never offered mercy to anyone. They had destroyed thousands of species without hesitation. By their own standards, by the rules they had enforced across the galaxy for millions of years, humanity should erase them completely. But the Admiral's message was clear. Humanity was not the draconic Imperium. They did not believe in extinction as a solution. They believed in justice, and justice meant the dragons would face consequences for their crimes while still being allowed to exist. The Emperor agreed to meet. As his ship lifted from Drakethor Prime toward the human flagship, he wondered what kind of species would show mercy to enemies who would show none. He wondered if humanity was truly stronger, or if they were making a mistake that would cost them in the future. Most of all, he wondered if dragons, after millions of years of believing they were superior to all other life, could learn to be something different. Emperor Thalkorath entered the human flagship alone and unarmed. The ship was smaller than any dragon world ship, built for function rather than intimidation. Human soldiers lined the corridors, their weapons ready but not aimed at him. They watched the Dragon Emperor with hard eyes, eyes that had seen too much death. But they did not attack. Admiral Chen Zhao waited in a simple conference room. She stood when the Emperor entered, a gesture of respect that surprised him. She was older than when the war had started, with gray in her hair and lines on her face that spoke of years under stress. Behind her, a window showed Drakethor Prime hanging in space, the dragon homeworld that had given birth to the Imperium millions of years ago. The Admiral gestured to a seat that had been specially built to accommodate a dragon's size. Thalkorath sat, his cracked diamond scales catching the light. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence held the weight of 4 years of war, millions of deaths, and the end of an empire. Admiral Chen finally spoke. Her voice was tired but firm, carrying authority earned through years of impossible decisions. She told the Emperor that humanity had come to offer terms, but they were not negotiable. The dragons could accept them and survive, or they could refuse and face extinction. The choice was theirs. The terms were absolute and brutal. Complete disarmament of all dragon military forces. Surrender of all territory outside the home system. War crime tribunals for every dragon who had committed atrocities, which meant almost every dragon over 100 years old would face trial. The dragons would be confined to Drakethor Prime and monitored by human peacekeeping forces for the next 1,000 years. In exchange, the dragons would be allowed to continue existing. They would not be exterminated, enslaved, or experimented on. They would have basic rights and the freedom to rebuild their culture within their home system. After 1,000 years, if they had proven they could coexist peacefully with other species, the restrictions would be lifted. The Emperor listened to the terms with growing anger. Every word was an insult to dragon pride, a reduction of his species from galactic rulers to prisoners in their own home. His first instinct was to refuse, to demand they die fighting rather than accept such humiliation. Then Admiral Chen showed him something that changed his mind. She activated a display that filled the room with images. But these were not images of the war, of battles won or cities burned. They were images of the species the Imperium had destroyed over millions of years. The Admiral had brought records, thousands of them, that humanity had recovered from captured dragon archives. She showed the Emperor what his species had done. Civilizations that had created beautiful art, erased. Species that had developed unique philosophies, extinct. Worlds that had been home to billions of lives, burned to lifeless rocks. But humanity had done more than just recover the records. They had studied them, preserved them, and rebuilt what they could. The admiral showed the emperor virtual reconstructions of dead cities, translations of lost languages, and recordings of music from species that had been extinct for millennia. Human scholars had spent years working to understand and honor these lost cultures. Admiral Chan explained that humanity had built monuments on 12 worlds, each one dedicated to a species the dragons had destroyed. The monuments contained everything humans had learned about these lost civilizations. Their languages would be taught in human schools. Their art would be displayed in human museums. Their stories would be remembered forever. The emperor stared at the images and felt something he had not experienced in his 300 years of life. It was not fear or anger, emotions he knew well. It was shame. Deep, crushing shame at what his species had done, at what he personally had done in the name of dragon supremacy. Admiral Chun's voice softened slightly as she continued. She told the emperor that humanity understood pride, understood the difficulty of admitting defeat. But she also told him that his choice now would determine whether dragons were remembered as monsters who got what they deserved, or as a species that had made terrible mistakes but found the courage to change. The admiral leaned forward, her tired eyes meeting the emperor's ancient gaze. She said that humanity had learned something important during the war. They had learned that they never wanted to become what the dragons were. They had learned that true strength was not the power to destroy, but the wisdom to show mercy even when vengeance was justified. Thalkorath asked the question that had haunted him since the battle at Earth. Why? Why would humanity spare the dragons after everything that had happened? Why show mercy to enemies who had shown none? The admiral's answer was simple. She said that the moment humanity became like the Imperium, the moment they chose extinction over justice, the dragons would have won. The war was not just about survival. It was about proving that there was a better way to live in the galaxy. A way based on cooperation and equality rather than domination and fear. The emperor sat in silence for a long time, processing everything he had seen and heard. His pride wanted to reject the terms, to choose death over submission. But he thought about the 3,000 dragons remaining on Drakethor Prime, the last survivors of a species that had once numbered in the millions. He thought about the extinct species, erased because dragons had valued pride over mercy. Emperor Thalkorath the Eternal, who had ruled for 2 centuries and believed his species blessed by the universe itself, made his decision. He stood from his seat and performed an action no dragon emperor had done in recorded history. He knelt before the human admiral, his diamond scales scraping against the metal floor. He accepted the terms of surrender on behalf of all dragons. The war was over. The Draconic Imperium was finished. The process of dismantling the Imperium took 2 years. Dragon weapons were destroyed under human supervision. War crime tribunals were held, and many dragons faced justice for their actions. Some were imprisoned, a few were executed for the worst atrocities, but most were simply required to face their victims and hear testimony about the suffering they had caused. The freed client species of the Imperium responded in different ways. Some wanted all dragons dead, seeking revenge for generations of oppression. Others were willing to forgive, seeing the dragons as fellow victims of their own culture. Humanity mediated between these groups, establishing a galactic senate where all species had equal representation. The dragons were given 1 seat in the senate, the same as everyone else. They were no longer masters but equals, and that adjustment was harder than the war had been. Many dragons struggled with depression, unable to accept their reduced status. But slowly, gradually, they began to adapt. 5 years after the war ended, a young human xenanthropologist named Sarah Morrison visited Drakethor Prime. She was studying dragon culture for her research. trying to understand how a species could change so fundamentally. An old dragon named Silketh, who had fought in the early battles of the war, agreed to speak with her. They met in a garden the dragons had built after the surrender, a place of meditation and reflection. Silketh had lost his left wing in the battle at New Hope and walked with a permanent limp. He asked Sarah the question that haunted many dragons. Why had humanity spared them when they would have exterminated humanity without hesitation? Sarah looked at the old dragon, at this creature that had once thought itself a god. She considered her answer carefully, knowing that her words would be shared with other dragons. She told him that humanity had fought the war to stop the Imperium, not to become it. She said that every species deserved a chance to change, to be better than their worst actions. She also told him something else, something important. She said that humanity had not forgiven the dragons, not completely. Forgiveness would take generations, maybe longer. But humanity had chosen justice over revenge, and there was a difference. The dragons would live with the consequences of their actions forever, but they would live. Silketh listened and slowly nodded his massive head. He told Sarah that dragons were learning a painful lesson, one that should have been learned millions of years ago. Power without wisdom was not strength. It was just cruelty with a crown. Decades passed. The dragons remained on their homeworld, monitored but not oppressed. Young dragons grew up learning about the Imperium's crimes in school, studying the cultures their ancestors had destroyed. It was painful education, but necessary. The galaxy slowly healed. The freed species built new civilizations, helped by human technology and resources. Trade networks formed based on mutual benefit rather than forced tribute. The Galactic Senate grew in influence, mediating disputes and preventing conflicts. Humanity became known not as conquerors, but as peacekeepers, the species that had stopped the Imperium and then showed mercy. Other species looked to humans for leadership, and humanity accepted the responsibility carefully, always remembering the lessons they had learned. The Draconic Imperium was gone, but the dragons survived. They were diminished, humbled, and forever marked by their history. But they were alive, given a chance at redemption they had never offered anyone else. In the Galactic Senate, representatives from 100 species worked together to build a better future. The age of the Imperium had ended. The age of equals had begun. And across the galaxy, young species learned the most important lesson, that mercy was not weakness, and that even the mightiest could fall if they forgot the value of humility. The dragons had learned the cost of arrogance. Humanity had paid the price of that education, and the galaxy was better for it, forever changed by the species who had proven that strength without compassion was just another form of weakness.